The Special Armoured Brigade, also known as the Raggruppamento Babini, was an ad hoc armoured unit formed by the Italian Royal Army in Italian North Africa. At the start of the Western Desert Campaign of World War II, the group was formed in Libya, as part of a plan to assemble an armoured division from the tanks already in the colony and from units sent from Italy. The new division was incomplete when the British began Operation Compass in December, but the Babini Group fought in defence of the area between Mechili and Derna in late January. On the 23rd of January, the group managed to inflict tank losses during a counter-attack on the 11th Hussars and force a delay in the Australian advance on Derna. The group then formed a rearguard for the 10th Army as it retreated from Derna and Mechili round the Jebel Akhdar towards the port of Benghazi. The Babini Group was destroyed south of the port at the Battle of Badr Fomm, when the Via Balcer was cut by Combe force. The Italians failed to concentrate the remaining tanks at the head of the column before Combe force was reinforced and were defeated in detail, with possibly only 9 tanks escaping to the south. Background: 32nd Armoured Regiment. The 32nd Armoured Regiment was formed on 1 December 1938 and on 1 February 1939 became part of the 132nd Armoured Division Ariete, the 2nd Italian Armoured Division. At the Italian declaration of war on June 11, 1940, the 32nd Armoured Regiment moved with the Ariete Division from Veneto to the border with France, as part of the Army of the Po, but the war ended so quickly that the division was not used. On 28 July 1939, the Iron II medium tank battalions received 96 Fiat M11 39 tanks to replace its Fiat 3000s. The inadequacies of the M11 39 tanks led to a decision on 26 October 1939 to replace them with M13 40 tanks, and the first batch, built by II.The at Genoa in October 1940, were used to equip the 3 medium tank battalion with 37 of the new tanks. Libyan Tank Command. In 1940, the Italian Army had 3 armoured divisions in Europe, which were needed for the occupation of Albania and the invasion of Greece. The I Medium Tank Battalion and the II Medium Tank Battalion and their M11 39 tanks landed in Libya on 8 July 1940 and transferred from the 32nd Armoured Regiment in Italy to the command of the 4th Armoured Regiment in Libya. The 2 battalions had an establishment of 600 men, 72 times tanks, 56 times vehicles, 37 times motorcycles and 76 times trailers. The medium tanks reinforced the 324 times L335th tanks already in Libya. The Libyan Tank Command, Comando Carri Armati della Libia, was formed in Libya on 29 August 1940, to be the armoured regiment of a new armoured division, composed of tanks en route to Libya and the tanks already in the colony. The new command comprised the Oresca Group, Raggruppamento Oresca, with the I Medium Tank Battalion and the 31 LXI and LXII Light Tank Battalions. The Trivioli Group, Raggruppamento Trivioli, with the 2 Medium Tank Battalion, less 1 Company, and the IXXX and LXI Light Tank Battalions. The Maletti Group, Raggruppamento Maletti, had the Lux Light Tank Battalion and the remaining M11 39 Company from the 2 Medium Tank Battalion. When Operation Compass began, the IX Light Tank Battalion was still with the 2nd Libyan Infantry Division Pescatore. The 2 Medium Tank Battalion was with the Mechili Group, and the LXII and XX Light Tank Battalions were in reserve at the 21st Corps HQ east of Frontier Wire in Egypt. The 3 Medium Tank Battalion from the 132nd Armored Division Ariete, equipped with 37 times M13 40 tanks in 2 companies, arrived in Benghazi in late September and joined the 417 vehicles of various types in the Libyan Tank Command to begin training. In November, the 3 Medium Tank Battalion was sent to Mechili, and on the 9th of December, the British began Operation Compass to push back the 10th Army from Sidi Barani, 62 miles inside Egypt. The 3 Medium Tank Battalion was sent forward to Solomon the Half-Hour Pass. On the 22nd of January, the VI Medium Tank Battalion arrived at Benghazi with 37 times M13 40s and another 36 times M13 40s for the 21 Light Tank Battalion, which was waiting at Benghazi to convert to M13 40s after all of its L3 35th tankets had been lost in the fall of Tobruk. Neither battalion had time to acclimatize a train but were sent to reinforce the big army group near Soluch. Prelude. Mechili Group. The Mechili Group, Raggruppamento Babini, was formed at dawn of the same day, with the Lux Light Tank Battalion and the remaining M11 39 Company from the 2 Medium Tank Battalion, 7 Libyan Motorized Infantry Battalions, Motorized Artillery and Supply Units as the main motorized unit of the 10th Army and the 1st Combined Arms Unit in North Africa. After the invasion of Egypt in September 1940, the 10th Army began to prepare an advance to Mersa Matruh for the 16th of December but was forestalled by Operation Compass. Only the IX Light Tank Battalion, the 2 Medium Tank Battalion with M11 39s, with the Mechili Group at Libya camp and the LXII and XX Light Tank Battalions were still in Egypt. The camp at Libya was a rectangle about 1.6-by-2.4-kilometre, with a bank and an anti-tank ditch. A minefield had been laid, but at the northwest corner, there was a gap in the mines for delivery lorries, which was found. A British night reconnaissance found the entrance. The British attacked the camp from the rear, with infantry and Matilda infantry tanks at 5 o'clock a.m. on the 9th of December, from the northwest, with Bren carriers on the flanks, all firing on the move. About 20 of the Mechili Group M11 39s outside the camp were destroyed in the first rush. By 10:40 a.m., the camp had been overrun and 2,000 Italian and Libyan prisoners had been taken, along with a large quantity of supplies and water, for a British loss of 56 men. After the battle, Alan Moorhead, an Australian war correspondent, visited Libya and saw tanks inside the camp facing in all directions and light tank wrecks at the west wall, where the Mechili Group had made its last stand. In his history of the 32nd Armoured Regiment, Maurizio Parri wrote that a company of the 2 Medium Tank Battalion with its M11 39s had tried to counter-attack the British Matildas, but the crews misunderstood flag signals, which caused delays and the attack failed. Mechili was wounded while rallying his men, then retreated to his tent with a machine gun, where he was killed. Babini Group. In early November, the V Medium Tank Battalion arrived at Benghazi with 37 times M13 40s in 2 companies, and on the 25th of November, Graziani ordered the establishment at Marsaluch of the Special Armoured Brigade, Brigata Corazzata Special, Raggruppamento Babini, to be commanded by General Valentino Babini, with the 3 Medium Tank Battalion and the V Medium Tank Battalion, combined with the L3 35s of the 4th Tank Regiment. The medium tank crews were inexperienced and lacked training. many of the officers having only recently come from very short courses at training schools. The light tank battalions remained with the infantry divisions in Egypt, despite this interrupting training with the new M1340s, which was complicated by the M13s coming from the first production batch with many mechanical defects. Only 3 of the 3 medium tank battalion tanks had radio, which made the other crews reliant on flag signals limited to halt, forward, backwards, right, left, slow down and speed up. The Babini Group had an infantry regiment of 3 Bersaglieri battalions, a motorcycle battalion, an artillery regiment, 2 anti-tank gun companies, an engineer company and supply units. On the 11th of December the under-trained 3 medium tank battalion and the LI light tank battalion in L3 35th tank kits was made available to the 10th Army. Next day, 2 companies of the 3 battalion were sent to Sollum, several tanks to II.The and the rest to Hafire, before the battalion was ordered to retreat west of Gazala to cover the rear of Tobruk. The 1st Tank Company was detached to reinforce Bardia, and the drive from II.The exposed many technical failings in the M1340s, including defective fuel pumps, inconsistent fuel consumption between tanks, engine wear and brittle armor. In December, Commando Supremo reinforced the Babini Group with the V medium tank battalion of the 132nd Armored Division Ariete to join the 3 medium tank battalion. The V medium tank battalion was sent to Derna to join the Babini Group on the 16th of January 1941, but a lack of tank transporters meant that the M1340 had to drive on the tracks, which caused many breakdowns, and on the 19th of December, Commando Supremo in Rome arranged to rush every available M1340ths to Tripoli. Operations. Derna Mechili, the area east of the Jebel-Akhdar mountains around Derna, was garrisoned by 20th Corps with the 60th Infantry Division II.The and the Babini Group, which had already lost some of its tanks in Tobruk. The 3 medium battalion and the V medium battalion had establishments of 55 times M1340 tanks, which should have amounted to at least 120 times M13s in the group, but 82 had recently been landed at Benghazi. The new tanks needed 10 days to be made battle-worthy and a 3-day journey to reach Mechili, but in the crisis, tanks had been rushed forward, driving on the tracks, due to a lack of tank transporters, which reduced the serviceability of the vehicles. A defensive position was established by the 60th Infantry Division II.The on a line from Derna along Wadi Derna, with the Babini Group concentrating at El Ghazay-Bib, south of Mechili, and Giovanni Berta and Chorlin, to guard the flank and rear of the infantry. On the 22nd of January, the British advanced towards Derna with the 19th Australian Brigade and sent another Australian Brigade to reinforce the 4th Armoured Brigade of the 7th Armoured Division, south of the Jebel-Akhdar, for an advance on Mechili. Next day, the 10th Army Commander, General Giuseppe Tallera, ordered a counter-attack against the British as they approached Mechili, to avoid an envelopment of 20th Corps from the south, but communication within the Babini Group was slow, because only the tanks of senior commanders had wireless. Next day, 10 to 15 M1340s of the Babini Group attacked the 7th Hussars of the 4th Armoured Brigade, which was heading west to cut the Derna-Mechili track north of Mechili. The Italians fired on the move, hit several tanks and pursued as the British swiftly retired, calling for help from the 2nd RTR, which ignored the signals through complacency. By 11 o'clock a.m., the British had lost several light tanks than a cruiser tank. One cruiser had a jammed gun and the third was retiring at speed, after taking 50 rounds to knock out 2 M13s. Eventually the second RTR was alerted, caught the Italian tanks while skylined on a ridge and knocked out 7 M13s by 11:30 a.m. for the loss of the cruiser and 6 light tanks. Tellera intended to use the Babini Group to harass the southern flank of the British, to cover a withdrawal from Mechili, but Graziani ordered him to wait on events. By the evening, a report had arrived from Babini that the group was down from 50 to 60 tanks and that the performance had been disappointing, along with alarmist tales of 150 British tanks advancing round the southern flank. Graziani then ordered Tellera to disengage the Babini Group by next morning. Some tanks of the group had been held back at Benghazi and work had begun on a defensive position at Sirte, 440 miles to the south. On the 25th of January in the north, the II. 11th Australian Battalion engaged the 60th Infantry Division Sub-Rather and the 10th Bersaglieri of the Babini Group at Derna airfield, making slow progress against determined resistance. Italian bombers and fighters flew sorties against the II. 11th Australian Battalion, as it attacked the airfield and high ground at Sirat el Khyber. The 10th Bersaglieri swept the flat ground with field artillery and machine guns, stopping the Australian advance 3,000 yards short of the objective. The 4th Armoured Brigade was ordered to encircle Mechili and cut the western and northwestern exits, while the 7th Armoured Brigade cut the road from Mechili to Slonta, but the Babini Group had retreated from Mechili during the night. The group retreated south of Slonta to Bermelas and Antalat, covering 140 miles through sandstorms and air attacks, pursued by the 4th Armoured Brigade until it had to stop on the 28th of January due to lack of fuel, exhaustion and camel tracks turning to deep mud in the rains. On the 26th of January, Graziani ordered Tellera to continue the defensive to Derna and to use the Babini Group to stop an advance westwards from Mechili to Derna. Tellera requested more tanks, but this was refused, until the defences of Derna began to collapse the next day. During the day, the II. 4th Australian Battalion in the Derna Giovanni Berta area attacked and cut the Derna-Mechili road, and a company crossed Wadi Derna during the night. On the northern edge of the wadi, a bold counter-attack with artillery support was made across open ground by the 10th Bersaglieri of the Babini Group, which, with reports in the morning that the group was attacking round the southern flank, deterred the Australians from continuing the advance on Derna, which cost 40 Bersaglieri killed and 56 captured. During the 27th of January, Australian attempts to attack were met by massed artillery fire, against which the Australian artillery were rationed to 10 rounds per gun per day. The II. 4th Australian Battalion repulsed another battalion-strength counter-attack. A column of Bren carriers of the 6th Australian Cavalry Regiment was sent south to reconnoitre the area where the Italian tanks had been reported, and was ambushed by a party of the Babini Group with concealed anti-tank guns and machine guns. 4 Australians were killed and 3 taken prisoner. The 11th Hussars found a gap at Chorlan south of Wadi Derna, which threatened the Babini Group and the defenders in Derna with encirclement, and Berganzoni ordered a retirement. The Italians disengaged on the night of 29 January before the garrison could be trapped, and Babini Group rearguards created roads, planted mines and booby traps, and managed to conduct several skillful ambushes, which slowed the British pursuit. Beta FOMM, the 5th of February at Benghazi and Beta FOMM. The Babini Group had almost 100 times M13, 40 tanks. During the retreat from Benghazi, commanded by the 23rd Corps commander, Lieutenant General Annibal Bergenz-Early, the first convoy reached the area of Beta FOMM, ran into a minefield planted across the road and was engaged by the artillery, anti-tank guns and armored cars of Com Force, which threw the column into confusion. Some members of the 10th Battalion tried to advance down the road and others on the flanks, southwest of Antalat and 32 kilometers north of Al-Jedabiyah, with the rest of the force following on south of the Jebel Akda. The Battalion had little effect, being unsupported by artillery, most of which was with the rearguard to the north. The vanguard of the Italian retreat had no tanks, few frontline infantry, and were trapped by the ambush, which forced them to fight where they stood. Italian rear area personnel and civilians tried to escape by driving west off the road into the sand dunes and got bogged down. Lorries carrying petrol caught fire and lit the dusk, illuminating targets for the British gunners and giving the tanks en route to mark to drive for. The British artillery was not needed and the crews took about 800 prisoners. Tellera, commanding the rearguard, had to retain part of the Babini Group, rather than send all of it south to reinforce Bergenz-Early, for the attempt to break through the British to Ajdabiya. The fort at II.The had been garrisoned by the Babini Group of the 10th Battalion, to block the route towards the north end of the Italian column on the Via Balbia, and Tellera detached another 30 tanks from the Babini Group as a reinforcement. The breakthrough attempts to the south could not be fully reinforced, and the Italians could not expect to be undisturbed by British attacks so long. The convoy of the Australian advanced down the Via Balbia, towards the tail of the column. When the rest of the Babini Group arrived at Beta FOMM, it could be supported only by improvised artillery and infantry groups, which had little idea of British dispositions. In the absence of reconnaissance, the 6th of February, the retirement of the 4th Armoured Brigade in II.The led Bergenz-Early to believe that the force would concentrate in defense of the roadblock, and during the night, he organized an attack down the Via Balbia to pin down the defenders. A flanking move by the Babini Group eastwards through the desert just west of a feature known as the Pimple was intended to get behind Com Force. On the morning of the 6th of February, the Babini Group had 16 officers and 2,300 men, 24 times M13s in the V medium tank battalion, 12 of the 3 medium tank battalion at the rear, 24 times guns, 18 times anti-tank guns, 320 times assorted lorries and other small vehicles. At 8:30 a.m., the Babini Group advanced without artillery support and with no knowledge of the situation beyond the first ridge to the east. The 7th Support Group, which was left with only the 1st King's Royal Rifle Corps and some artillery, was held up at II.The by minefields covered by artillery and the Babini Group. At dawn on the 6th of February, the Australians continued their attacks on Benghazi from the north, and the British continued to attack at II.The, where Babini was ordered to retire at 10 o'clock a.m., keep the British off the rear of the column, and send the Babini Group detachment south to reinforce the breakout attempt. On the Via Balbia, the first wave of 10 M13s from the Babini Group advanced slowly at 8:30 a.m., and were surprised when turrets of the British cruisers appeared over a ridge 600 100 yards away. 8 M13s were knocked out and then the British tanks disappeared below the ridge. The British tanks reappeared over the ridge near the White Mosque and the Pimple to knock out another 7 M13s. Italian artillery opened fire on the mosque and every operational tank the Babini Group had left advanced towards the Pimple and the mosque. At 10:30 a.m., another big Italian convoy arrived from the north, escorted by M13s which forced back the British. The escorting tanks of the Babini Group kept the light tanks at a distance, but they were still able to inflict damage and sow confusion. The weather turned to rain as more Italian columns arrived near the Pimple and were engaged by the British tanks, wherever there were no Italian tanks to stop them. By noon, 40 Italian M13s had been knocked out and only about 50 were left. At 1:00 p.m., the V medium tank battalion engaged British tanks and then the 3 medium tank battalion arrived and joined in. 3 British tanks were knocked out and the British retired, leaving behind several prisoners. The 3 battalion then repulsed another attack by 12 British tanks on the 10th Army column between Beda FOMM and the sea. After being ambushed by 20 British cruiser tanks, all but 4 of the M13-40s of the VI medium tank battalion were knocked out. Only 24 days after arriving in Libya, the Italian rearguard arrived in the afternoon and the concentration of tanks and artillery enabled the Italians to recapture the Pimple, open the road south and continue the outflanking move to the east. The 21 medium tank battalion arrived late, found itself obstructed by a minefield and was unable to attack as more British tanks arrived as night fell and intercepted the column as several Italian vehicles and 30 tanks got past the Pimple. Bergenzerli abandoned attempts to hook round the eastern flank and sent the last of the Babini Group west through the dunes. Just as the British tanks had to rearm, several British tanks pursued the Italians, firing into the convoy, setting vehicles alight, forcing drivers to abandon the vehicles or leave the road for the dunes to the west, where they dodged British artillery fire and attacks by light tanks, which took 350 prisoners. The 7th of February the Babini Group had only about 30 tanks left and Bergenzerli planned to ask them to force a passage through Comforts at dawn, before the British could attack the flanks and rear of the column. The Babini Group was supported by artillery fire as soon as it became light enough to see movement by the British anti-tank guns. Port AA. British infantry stayed under cover as they were overrun by the M13s, which concentrated the fire on the British anti-tank guns, and British artillery fired on the infantry positions as the Babini Group passed through. After the tanks had moved on, the British infantry resumed fire on Italian infantry following the tanks, to pin them down. The M13s knocked out all but one anti-tank gun and kept going, but the last anti-gun was driven to a flank and commenced firing as the last M13s drove onwards and knocked out the last surviving tank. On the road, the Italians could hear British tank engines on the flanks to the rear, and in the north the British surrounded another Italian group. Just before the 10th Army surrendered, the Beda FOMM area had become a 15-mile line of destroyed and abandoned lorries, about 100 times guns, 100 times knocked out or captured tanks and 25,000 prisoners, including Tellera, Bergenzerli and the 10th Army staff. The Babini Group lost more than 101 times M13s, of which 39 mainly from the 21 medium tank battalion were undamaged. Aftermath analysis on the 15th of February. A British analysis found that the Italians had been unable to mass the tanks sufficiently and they had attacked the British piecemeal, which was believed to be because the tanks had been spread through the Italian columns. Prisoners had said that the lack of wireless prevented a tactical reorganization in the confusion. The II and 21 medium battalions in M13s were considered to have shown inferior gunnery while on the move, unlike the III and V medium tank battalions at Mechili in January, perhaps because the newer battalions had only recently received M13s and were inadequately trained. Tests on captured M13s found that armor-piercing shells fired by a 25-pounder field gun at 800 yards went straight through the tank. When fired with an instantaneous fuse, the shell made a large hole in the armor of one side, and with a short delay, fuse shells exploded inside the tank. At 500 yards, a boy's anti-tank rifle dented the armor. Examination of wrecked tanks showed that a hit on the crew compartment almost always killed all the occupants. Although the reason for this was not apparent, only a few thousand men of the 10th Army and about 9 medium tanks had escaped the disaster in Cyrenaica, but the 5th Army had 4 divisions in Tripolitania and the Italians reinforced the II.The, Hassan and Burat strongholds from Italy, which brought the total of Italian soldiers in Tripolitania to about 150,000 men. The Italian forces in Libya experienced a renaissance during 1941, when the 101st Motorized Division Trieste, 102nd Motorized Division Trento, the 132nd Armored Division Ariete arrived along with better equipment. Italian anti-tank units performed well during Operation Brevity. Operation Battleaxe and the Ariete Division defeated the 2nd Armored Brigade at Bir El Goubi on the 19th of November during Operation Crusader. Commemoration. To commemorate the destruction of the V and 3 medium tank battalions, the 8th of February was chosen as Corpus Christi of the 32nd Armored Regiment. Order of Battle.